All right, so Django. Django is going to be your new best friend. He or she's going to seem intimidating up front, but promise you guys will come to love Django. So what is Django? Django is an ORM, otherwise known as Object Relational Mapper, which is a mouthful to say. But the whole idea here is that Django is kind of a framework that handles does the dirty work for you. In that sense, you can manipulate and interact with their database using an OOP paradigm. So again, OOP is something we focused on a few weeks ago. Definitely it's going to come up again and again. Here, basic idea is we can create objects in our code using Python, create classes, and that can automatically be mapped to your database via Django. So instead of you having to create your tables and queries in SQL, Django will handle that magic for you. So we're not going to be writing raw SQL from here on out. And the main point, yeah, Django will make your life easier. So again, it might seem complicated, but the whole point of using Django is so that we can get up and running, have a full stack application kind of up and running in really no time at all. All right, and then just want to throw a diagram at you that's going to make more sense once we actually get into it. But this is where Django sits. All these green boxes is what Django is providing. So the client is the end user. So that'd be you or I, like interacting with a web page. When we go to a particular URL, let's say we go to codeplatoon.org, that's going to be a request that our browser is making. It's going to be processed by a urls.py file within our Django project. That's going to map to a views.py file. This is called our controller. So maybe backing up a step, there's an idea of MVC design pattern. M stands for models, which is your models.py. V stands for view, which in Django's case is a little misleading. The view actually comes from templates. So the view is actually what the user sees and interacts with. That's going to be your HTML templates that you create within Django. And then the views.py is known as the controller. The controller is like your central processor where the views actually interacts with your models, interacts with your UI, and basically is the middleman between your data layer and your presentation layer. So again, the presentation layer is what your user actually sees and interacts with. Your data layer is what actually interacts with your database. And then your views sits in the middle and kind of manages both those sides of the equation, where it gets input from the display and processes the input data, and then uses that data to interact with your backend database and models so that you can process data and show it back to your user as needed. All right, so again, this diagram should make more sense once we actually get into using Django, but this is a high-level overview of the main three the files you're going to be focusing on are urls.py, which is your router. So basically, you're going to be taking in some URLs and then determining what to show the user. So your views will take in a URL, determine what to actually generate, and then Django will generate a display for your user. All right, so we'll get back to this diagram once we actually get into Django. This would probably be one of the few times where we'd highly encourage you guys to follow along. So if you guys want to take a moment to bring up your system so that you guys can create a Django application together, definitely recommended. Along the way, if you guys run into an issue, just feel free to ask. We want to make sure everyone is able to start and create a Django project. Any questions before we actually create our first Django project? All right, so with that, I'm gonna go to my coding window. Looks like I don't have my terminal up. I think I restarted my machine, so let me bring up an iTerm. All right, there it is. There it is, all right. Took a moment. I think everyone's dealing with Mondays, even my computer. All right, so what I want to do is create a new directory where I can create a Django project. So I'll create in my challenges folder, I guess. Let's call it Migrate First Django. All right, so I just created a folder. Switching to that folder, I'm gonna open a VS Code for that location. That should pop up shortly. All right, there it is. Let me relocate that. All right, so I have a VS Code window open. Hopefully you guys are following along and have your own VS Code window open. Now we're going to actually get to creating our first Django project, and then we'll inspect the various files that we'll be dealing with. So bringing up my terminal here. I think my computer's a little slow today.
Hey, Ankur, how you create the Django?
We're going to get to that. So I just created a folder called First Django. You can name your project wherever you want. We'll get into creating a Django.
Yet. Okay.
Yep. All right, so I brought up a terminal. We're going to do a number of steps. So I've written these steps down. I recommend, I mean, depends on your process, but there's a few steps you always have to do creating a Django project. This is not something that's deductive, as in you just figure out. Oftentimes you just got to know these steps, or Google them to kind of when you get an error to figure out what actually you need to achieve. But yeah, let's go through it. So the first question I'm going to ask a random member of the audience, Tim Gaston, since I heard from you last, I'll ask you, can you tell me what a virtual environment is with Python?
So a virtual environment?
Yep.
From what I understand, is more or less it's a I guess the cyber plane to where you can interact with your program. I guess that's the best way I can describe it.
What was the first part?
It's a cyber environment to where you can interact with your program.
Yeah, that's it's kind of along the ways. It is like an environment, as the name would kind of suggest. The way I can visualize it, it's just like a bubble that you're nested within, and everything in that bubble is self-contained. So what I mean by that is when you create a virtual environment, you're able to install libraries inside that bubble that doesn't affect your entire system. And the key thing there is that if you have multiple projects, each of those projects should be contained in their own virtual environment, so that if I install a version of a library in one project, it shouldn't affect the other project. And this is really important because you don't want to install something at the system level, because that could affect the way your project runs. For example, Django has many versions to it. The latest version, I think, is I actually don't know, maybe like 3. Let's actually find out. Latest Django version. All right, so it looks like 3.2.4 is their latest version. When you create your own projects, you're probably going to use the latest and greatest. But if you have projects that already have been created, which we in fact do with our challenges, they might be using an older version of Django. So you don't want to just install one version of Django and have every project use the same version. That's where virtual environments, again, just let you create a unique environment so that whatever project you're working on, you're using a set and specific set of libraries that don't impact any other project on your computer. Does that make sense to all of you guys? Take that as a yes. But yeah, so for Django, we're going to always be creating a virtual environment. So just keep that in mind, that anytime you're just going to create a project, just kind of automatically say, all right, I need to create a virtual environment for this.
Ankur, I have a question.
Yep.
So what you just explained, is that kind of similar to, what was it last week, whenever you have an application that works with a certain version, you kind of want to freeze it, and then is that similar to kind of what you're going along?
Yep, that is exactly. Yep, no, that is exactly the same thing. So we did dabble with virtual environments last week, I believe. It is the same concept. Yep. So we're going to do that again. Let me get rid of this window. All right, so I'm in my terminal here in VS Code. Again, if you're coding along, please kind of code along with me. The first step to create a Django project is I'm actually going to create a virtual environment. So to do that, the command is python -m. And you want to type in v&v. So VNV, that stands for virtual environment. And then you want to give your virtual environment a name. So this, you can name it pretty much anything you want. You usually want to keep it something sensible or standard. I always go with .vnv, just to have like a hidden folder for my virtual environment. All right, again, you can name it whatever you want. You can name it virtual, you can name it, I don't know what other standards there are. You can probably Google for common names for virtual environments. But yep, this is the syntax you want to go with. And let's call it step 0. It's creating a virtual environment. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to take a moment. Notice it creates a VNV folder for me in my file explorer here. So that's got all basically like a copy of the Python I'm going to be using. Any other libraries I install will be installed in the libraries folder here. Okay, so that created my virtual environment. Step 1, I guess if that was step 0 of creating a virtual environment, step 1 will be actually getting into that virtual environment. So we've created it. Now we want to tell our system that we're going to drop into that virtual environment. So the way we do that is we type source. And then we want to get into the virtual environment folder. So it's .vnv for my case, /bin/activate. So if you actually, again, explore your folder, your virtual environment folder, again, you never want to modify this manually. You don't really have to look into it, but there's a bin folder, which stands for binary, and there's an activate file in here. All right, so notice that this file says you must do source bin activate. So here I'm doing source, finding that folder, finding the binary folder, and calling activate.
I think the command is different on Windows.
Yeah, again, yeah. So if you're on a different system, whether it be Windows, maybe even Linux might be a little different, but yeah, we're going to be going off of Mac, so you might have to Google how to do it specifically for Windows. All right, so on a Mac, source BNV bin activate, I'm going to hit enter. Notice that my prompt now is prepended with my virtual environment. So now this kind of tells me I am within my virtual environment. If I want to ever get out of my virtual environment, you simply need to type in deactivate, and that should, again, notice my prompt is now no longer prepended with that virtual environment folder. So that's how you get out of it. All right, but we actually want to be inside of our virtual environment for installing Django. I'm going to go back to that and go back to my virtual environment. All right, so steps 0 and 1. Step 2 of our process is actually installing Django. So Django is a library that we can install for Python. So to do that, does anyone remember how to install libraries with Python?
Yeah, you do pip install and then whatever library you're trying to do.
Yep, pip is the install, I guess, library manager for Python. So type in pip install. Thank you, Rena. Install, and then the name of the library. So again, there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of libraries out there. Django is just one of them. So if I look into pip install Django, probably gives you some handy advice, maybe. All right, so they just give you, a description of, Django, what it does. Probably want to read Django documentation because their documentation is fantastic. So if I go to how to install Django, we kind of follow this process. So again, first thing I do is pip install Django. So we don't need to do the python-m. That's the way, I guess you can use pip, but usually in your terminal, you just type pip install and Django, and that will install the Django library. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a moment to kind of follow along if you guys are typing at home. I'm going to hit enter. And then it's going to take maybe a few seconds to kind of collect everything that's required. So it seems like Django relies on some other libraries. So those libraries are being installed also. SQL parse, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Pytes, a couple other libraries. All right, so now that's been installed. I can look at my libraries folder, and now there's new additions here. There's Django 3.2.4, so that is the latest version that we expected. Again, a few other libraries got installed also that Django relies on. So just make sure you don't delete that. Again, you should never be messing with your virtual environment. So kind of just ignore that and keep that folder untouched. All right, so that was step 2. We installed Django. Now we could actually create a Django project. So I'm gonna type in some commands. Again, these are commands you're gonna have to memorize or just write down and kind of expect to know. First thing you want to do is type in Django. Let me clear my screen and get more space here. So I'm going to type in Django admin start projects. All right, you guys with me so far? Again, without typos, hopefully. Django-admin, that's going to be the command running, start project. And then we want to give our project a name. So in this case, I'm going to call it school. I think that's what the curriculum has. So school is going to be my project. So I'll call it school proj. And now this is where I always recommend to add a period here. We can see what happens if you don't add the period. So normally if you just do Django admin start project, give your project name. Again, you can name it whatever you want. I usually like prepending my folders with proj just to make sure I know that's a project folder, but you guys can have your own naming conventions. So if I hit enter again without a period here, let's give that a run and see what happens. All right, so a new project or a new folder got created called school proj. If I open that up, notice there's another folder called school proj in it. That kind of just bothers me. I don't like having these nested folders that are the same name. So within that project folder, there's a few files that got automatically created by Django. But yeah, so if you don't add a period at the end when you're creating a project, it's going to create a nested folder for you, which is totally fine. It's not going to affect your development at all. It just affects your file organization. All right, so that was one way we do it. If I delete this folder so that my Django project is gone, I can rerun that. If I add a period here, that's going to just unnest those folders for me. So it's going to have one less layer that I need to go under. So again, the difference here is adding a period to create my new project. So if I run this, it still creates a school project folder for me, but now it has my manage.py at the top level, and then this folder has what it had before. Any questions about using that period? Like, again, it doesn't really matter how your files are organized. You can, if you like a nested folder, you can go forth with it. It's not going to affect us in any manner. All right, you guys with me so far? All right,
I'm still
go for it.
I'm still stuck on the virtual environment part for the PC side of things. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, you might have to Google that. Again, we could maybe do a quick Google, but we're probably going to focus on Mac development. So for your Windows users, you might have to Google it yourself, how to create.
I think Don figured that out.
Was it the pip3 instead of pip?
That was part of it, yeah.
All right, so again, there's probably many resources you guys can Google yourself. I'm not going to probably go through this because I don't have a system to test on. But yeah, it should be pretty straightforward. I'm not sure what the differences might be. Install pip. So you might have to install virtual environment. I'm not sure if that's true, but yeah, you guys might have to do Googling for that. So apologies for our Windows users out there. All right, where were we? All right, so we created our project. Now we have this project folder that has a few files in it. So again, we're gonna talk about some of these files. The main two that we're gonna focus on are settings.py and urls.py. This ASGI.py, we're not gonna deal with that, I don't think, ever. Might bring it up at the very end of our curriculum. But basically the WSGI and the ASGI, just don't pay attention to those. They have some stuff, some logic in it. We're not gonna touch them or care about that too much. All right, so we created our Django project. Next thing we want to do is create a Django app. So I think I have some slides for this, or slides we've used in the past. All right, so we have Django. The way Django works is we create a project, and within that project, we could have one or more applications inside of that project. So in this case, there's app 1, app 2, app 3. Again, as many apps as you want within one project. A good way to kind of think about that, we have an example with Amazon. So Amazon is a huge company, and they probably have several different apps that they're presenting. They're not just like one thing, right? They have Amazon Prime. They also have Amazon Music, which I've never used. Photos. I didn't even know they had a photo section, but it kind of makes sense. They have probably infinite web space. They have Alexa. They have also probably billing. They manage their own billing, I think. So again, you might create an Amazon project, and within that, you would have different apps that may interact with the same data, but have unique functions. So Amazon Prime is totally separate from their billing, but they might have some interaction in between them. All right, so, all right, we went through creating a project. So we did Django admin, start project, and gave our project name. We'll talk about manage.py shortly, but let's actually create our app. So to create our app, we're gonna write Python manage.py space start app, and then give our app name. All right, so let's do that together in our terminal. So I'm gonna do Python manage.py. So this manage.py file that's sitting on the top level. This is kind of just like our middleman. It kind of handles all the commands for us. So we're gonna pretty much anything we do with Django, it's always gonna have this format. It's gonna be Python manage.py and then some command after it. So in this case, the command we're gonna run is start app and give our app a name. I think let's call it school attendance. I think was what was on the curriculum. So if I do that, hit enter, it's gonna create a new folder for me. All right, so this is my app folder and this is my project folder. All right, so we created an app. Again, we create multiple apps we want to. For the most part, probably gonna have one app per project, but there's nothing stopping us from creating more apps if it makes sense. Any questions?
On Windows.
Yep, sorry, yeah, I won't be able to provide Windows supports at this time. Okay, so after you create your app, you wanna make sure that your project knows that that app exists. So this is where settings.py comes into play. So I'm going to go to my project folder, open up settings.py, and this has a bunch of lines already in it. So let me minimize my terminal a little bit. The first thing we want to do is look for something called installed apps. There's going to be a list of already pre-installed Django apps in this list, but we need to add our own app that we created here. So in this case, I'm going to add to the very end, and I'm going to add the name of my app. So in this case, the name of my app is school_attendance. So I'm going to add that same name here. And what this is basically going to do is going to tell Django that, hey, we have another app where there's might be additional logic to look for. Attendance. All right. So I added my app name. Again, these are steps you're going to always have to do whenever you create your app. Just always remember that your settings file, as many apps as you add on, you need to add that to the list of installed apps. Okay. So we did that. Next, again, we're always going to want to use a database when we have Django. By default, the default database is SQLite. So if you kind of scroll down, there should be a databases variable. The default always is going to default to SQLite. You can use SQLite. I usually always just use Postgres because I'm more familiar with it. SQLite, again, effectively, it's just like a file that acts as a database. So you can query it, you could do any, you can create tables, do the same things you could do with Postgres. There's just a different kind of method to do it. All right, so this is the default. By default, you're gonna always default to SQLite. But I always use Postgres, and we're gonna recommend Postgres most of the time. So let's actually hook it up to a Postgres database. So to do that, step one, I need to create my database. So I'm gonna do my Postgres command of create DB, and let's call my database school. Probably have a school database. Yep. I might have bigger troubles here. Let's see. So pSQL. All right, might need a quick detour. Apologies. I'm not sure how my system got messed up here.
Is it because you're in your environment that you can't get to SQL?
No, it should still work, but we could test that out. Worth trying out. I don't think it's because my virtual environments, but deactivate and pSQL. Yeah, I think it seems like my server's down. So let me quickly figure out resolution to that. So I think if we go back to InstallFest, hopefully no one else is running into this issue, but totally unexpected here. Week one. Where was it? InstallFest, macOS. Okay, so I think I need to run these commands. That's for M1. Hopefully this fixes it. All right, and the second one. Was that for the M1? That works. So yeah, I did add a section for any M1 users. If you have this issue, I think running these two commands should fix it for you. Otherwise, if you're on a non-M1 Mac, these should work for you. So I'm gonna try to get my Postgres servers running here.
You need an L at the beginning.
Yes, copy that forward. Copy and paste. That's not good. Sorry. All right, I'm gonna take a quick break here, so I don't want to waste your guys' time while I fix this. So let's take a quick, like 6 or 7 minute break while I try to figure this out. Apologies, I was not expecting this. So I'm gonna pause the recording here. right, so I got held up with my P-SQL. So that issue was now resolved. My main goal here was to create a Postgres database. So the way we normally do that is doing create DB and then naming our database. Let's call it school Django. All right, so no errors, meaning that database got created. If I want to actually check that out, talking to my P-SQL, look for no relations, DT. Slash L. There we go. Sorry, /L to list all my databases. So I have a bunch here. I just want to make sure my school database got created here. Go down, and there we go. School Django was the database I just created. So it's cool. Okay, so now that I have that database created, what I need to tell Django where my database is. So here in my database section, again, I'm in my settings.py. I want to change my database engine and my name so that I tell it to use Postgres. So in this case, I'm going to type in Postgres, Postgres SQL here. And then for my name, so I want to delete the existing name and just tell it simply the name of my database. So in this case, I name my database, my database school_Django. Again, you can name it whatever you want. You don't need to prepend it or postpend it with Django. You could, again, have any name you want for your database. All right, so given that, again, 2 changes in our settings file. One was we added our app that we created. Again, you always want to create an app. And then also updating our database if we create a Postgres database. Again, you can use SQLite. It's going to work effectively the same, but I'm more familiar with Postgres and we generally recommend that. So that's what we did. All right, so those two changes in settings.py. Then what we want to do is we need to migrate our database. So we created our app. Settings.py, we added our Postgres database, add to our apps and other configurations. At this point, we don't have any additional configurations, but we definitely might for other projects. So we accomplished that. Then let's take a look at the files that might exist. So we have our Django project here. Inside of an app, we're going to have a few files. We're going to have a models file, a views file, templates folder, migrations folder, urls.py, and then a few other ones. These aren't going to exist right off the bat. URLs, forms, and serializers. Those are files we might need to create if we want those functionalities. In this case, we almost always want to create a urls.py file. Forms and serializers, we'll get into that as we get deeper into Django in the coming days. All right, so taking a look at our app, if we expand it, notice that apps.py exists. There's admin.py. Models and views are the 2 files that we're going to be interacting with. And the third one we need is URLs. URLs is not created by default. So I'm going to create a urls.py file. So creating a new file inside my app folder and calling it urls.py.
Hey Lou, I don't mind if you're up here with me, but you need to chill.
This is kind of mysterious, but I've got a urls.py under my school project folder.
Yep. So if you open your project folder, you are going to have your urls.py. All right. So your project folder will have 4 files in it. It's going to have ASGI, WSGI settings, which we just interacted with, and then urls.py. That's going to be your project folder. Usually you want to create urls.py in your app folder also. So I created this new one. The one in my project already existed.
Can you back up just for a second? How did you end up getting the urls.py into your migration folder?
Yep. So I just created a new file and named it urls.py. So I was in my app folder, which is school attendance. I created a new file and called it urls.py.
I thought you moved it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So we're going to be messing with these 3 main files, which is models, URLs, and views. So we go back to our diagram that we had up before. Again, URLs, views, and models are our 3 main files we're going to be interacting with our project. And we'll be dealing with templates eventually. That's just our HTML files that we're going to create. But for Django, these are our core points of interest. All right, hopefully you guys are keeping pace with me. All right, so now that I have URLs, models, and views, let's actually create some useful things. So for now, what do I want to do? So we created our app. We need to, I guess let's create a model. That's usually a good place to start. So when we talk about creating models, again, this goes back to creating classes or objects that can be reflected in our database. So we're not going to be writing SQL. Django's going to do the work for us, but we still need to tell Django what structure or what object we want to work with. So for now, I'm going to create a class, and we're going to call that student. Again, hopefully you guys are familiar with classes. We've done that in the past. Here, I need to inherit from models dot model. All right, so this is something that's already should be imported in your models.py. If it's not, you need to add from Django.db import models if you don't have that already in your models.py inside of your app folder. Here, I'm going to create a new class called student, and that's going to inherit from this model object that's coming from Django. All right, here you could kind of think of this as creating a table in your database. So this is creating a student's table, and now I need to add some fields to it. All right, so one thing I might want to add is a name, and we'll make that. So now we're going to need to give a data type. So again, we're not in SQL. We're not writing raw SQL here. We're using objects that represent similar concepts in SQL. So in this case, you want to give it various field types. In this case, if you go off the models library, sorry, the models module, inside of here, you can get a whole list of fields. So there's Boolean field, binary field. In this case, I want to use something called char field. All right, char field is basically equivalent to varchar in SQL. And here I need to give it a max length. So when we're creating a varchar field in SQL, we usually give it a length of like 255 or 64 or whatever number of characters. Here you have to specify a max length. If you don't, you'll get an error eventually. So in this case, let's say a name can be 64 characters long. All right, and now you might be wondering, like, how did I just know about this? Well, this is where, again, reading documentation is half the battle here. So let's actually take a peek at Django documentation because it's fantastic. Let's talk about model reference. All right, so model field reference is the documentation page I'm on. And this talks about all the types of field types you have. So I click on field types. It just gives me a good description of all the types that exist and when I might want to use them. So again, there's big integer field, there's binary field, Boolean field. So if you want to store something as true and false, you'd use a Boolean field. Char field is what I just used for my name. Again, char field is basically equivalent to varchar in SQL. So again, if you want to use a lot of text, it points you to using text field. Again, you guys can read through this. There's dozens of fields you can use. There's date time fields, decimal field. Again, very similar to what we dealt with in SQL. Any questions about field types here? They do have like some specialized fields, so like an email field. So that probably validates that you have the @ symbol and like the .com or .whatever. So again, definitely useful, more useful things here than you get in SQL.
Yeah, I just can't stress this enough with regards to Django. I think I've mentioned this before, like it's 80% reading documentation, 20% coding. It's especially like that with Django, but fortunately Django has a really great documentation with lots of examples. So you'll just have to do a lot of reading.
Yep. Yeah, definitely agree with Tom. Their documentation is really, really phenomenal. So don't get spoiled by them. Don't expect every third-party framework or library to have as good documentation as Django does, but they do a good job with it. They have tutorials also that you can run through on your own that also can kind of get you acquainted with Django. But again, read up on references if you have questions about different types of fields we can use. But for now, I'm just going to go with char field because that's, again, what I want to use for name. Let's have maybe something else. Let's have maybe date of birth. We'll call it DOB. And models, let's make that a date field. So again, I could use date time if I want to, if I care about the time. In this case, only care about the birth date. So we'll have that. For a date field, if we read documentation, since we were talking about documentation, there's some additional values you could specify. There's an auto now Boolean, which means anytime you save your model, in this case, a student record, auto now, if you set that equal to true, will automatically update a timestamp, that timestamp field to be the current value. So if I save this at this given moment, it'll take whatever current time it is. So it'll take, I guess, the date, which is Monday, June 8th. That'll be automatically inserted for this field if I set this value to true. Also, auto now add. That's whenever you add a new record, it's going to automatically use the current time. In this case, we're setting date of birth. So we don't really care to update this to the current time. So in this case, I'm not going to specify, auto now. By default, it's false. But if you want that to be true, you can set that to true. So we have a date field here. Yeah, for now, I think these are the two fields I want. Nothing too complicated going here. Just have a name and date of birth for a student. One thing to mention here, a difference between creating a SQL table and creating a model. You don't need to create a specific ID field. Like I don't need to create an int models.int field, integer field. I do not need to create an ID field. Django will automatically do that for me. So it's going to expect for every model you create, it's going to have an ID as your primary key. All right. So you do not need to create an ID yourself. All right. So here I have name and date of birth. All right. I'm pretty good with these two fields for now. So I'm actually going to just go with this. So I've created my model. What the key thing I need to do now is actually have that adopted into my database. So like Postgres is my backend database. It doesn't automatically know like, hey, this is how I want to represent my data. So this is where Django needs to migrate your models to your database. So there's a couple steps we need to do here. So once you've created your models, save your file. Yes, hit save. And go back to my terminal. Again, we're going to go back to Python manage.py. Again, we're going to always, pretty much anytime you're interacting with your Django project, you're going to do it through python.manage.py. Sorry, Python space manage.py. All right, in this case, we want to run two commands. The first one is called make migrations. This is basically going to take all the pre-baked logic from Django. Django has its own models that it needs that it already has created, and then you might have additional models you're creating. In this case, if you want to make migrations, it's going to go through your entire project and all of your apps and create a migration script for you. If you want to specify only which app you want to run, then you could type in an app name here. So if I did school attendance, that'll update my migrations file just for my students model that I created. In this case, I want to do it for my entire project because I need to run that at least once before I get up and going. So I'm going to do Python manage.py, make migrations as one word. Okay, so I'm going to run that. Looks like I missed a step. So apologies there. So we are using a Postgres database. If you remember from last week, in order for Python to interact with Postgres, we need to install a new module or new library. So here I need to do pip install psychopg2. So this is the library that says let's Python interface with SQL database. So that's the stuff I missed. So do pip install psychopg2. Give that a run. It's going to install that. Takes a few seconds. Again, I'm still in my virtual environment. So I can install psychopg at the system level, but again, usually for your virtual environment, you want to install everything within that bubble. All right, it's taking a while. There we go. So psychopg now is installed. So I kind of glazed over it. So before, when I tried to make migrations, I got this error because again, Django had no way of interacting with my Postgres database. The reason being psychopg was not installed. So now that I have that installed, I can go back to my previous commands of Python manage.py, make migrations. So now hopefully it should be able to interface with my database. So if I run that, it should do its thing. All right, so it created a student model. So that's something we created here. If you inspect your app folder, so again, my app folder is called school attendance. There's a migrations folder that got created. If you actually open that up and look inside there, it's going to have it might have a bunch of files in there. Each time you run make migrations, a new file will be created. So look in there. It has some migrations logic here. So it's going to create a model. Again, this is auto-generated. This is not something I created. notice that an ID field got automatically inserted here. Again, to review that, here in my model, I only specify name and date of birth, but Django took care of creating an ID for me that is the primary key, right? Because each table needs a primary key, so it's automatically created one that's going to be managed for me.
Yeah, I agree. I ran the psychops and whatnot, what you just did. I still get an error whenever I try to do the make migrations.
Yeah, it says what has no migration class or bad migration error. Is that what it says?
Say that one more time.
Yeah, mine says something similar. It says a bunch of errors and like bad migration error, migration URLs, and app school attendance has no migration class.
Yeah, because at the bottom mine says improperly configured or something along that lines.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it'd be a good time to kind of troubleshoot because other students might be having it. Alex, would you be willing to share your screen?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Again, I want to make sure everyone is able to get a Django project running. We'll see what particular issues you guys run into. So Alex is going to share his screen now. I like the background there.
Ankur, do you mind if we take a break after this?
Sure, absolutely. All right, so we have Alex's screen. Let's see. Yep, his model looks like mine.
So yeah, that's essentially the last two steps you did with the.
Okay. Yes, you might be missing in your settings that for your project file. So if you go to school_proj, that folder, look in your settings.py file. So again, in settings.py, we need to set two things. You got school attendance. Let's look at your database section. So there should be a variable called database halfway through this file.
I think I may have so is for install apps, is it supposed to be, because I essentially did school underscore Django. Is this where this would go?
No, so that should be your app. So you have an app that you created by doing the Python manage.py start app and then give it a name of school attendance. Yep, that looks correct. If you scroll halfway through the settings file, look for a database variable. Yep, right there. So here, I think I see a typo. So you have Postgres, you need a T.
Oh,
yep. Yep, you didn't make a typo. Happens to all of us. So now if you gotta save your settings file and try running, there you go. All right. Yep.
It's always a letter.
Yep. So basically, Django didn't know what type of database you're interacting with because they obviously didn't know what Postgres is, but Postgres seems to be working now. So great. All right. I'm gonna let's take I think someone asked for a break. So yeah, let's definitely take breaks as needed. So what we've done so far, just to summarize, we created a Django project, we created a Django app. We also created a Postgres database. And we also need to install PsychoPG with that. Kind of stumbling over my words today. So we created our Django app, Django project, created a database, installed PsychoPG, and then after we updated our settings file, we were able to make migrations. One more step before we take a break. This still hasn't updated our database. What this has done is created a transition or a migration that we can run to update our database. So this file has been created for us. We actually need to run that file. The way we run that is typing Python manage.py and simply type migrate. So make migrations creates your files for migration. You actually need to take the additional step of actually migrating it, which actually is going to update your database. So if I look at my database right now, if I go to PC.
You're not sharing your screen.
Sorry, thank you. Share screen. Okay, so I'm going into my school database that I created. So school Django is what I called it. If I look in my definitions, I think I just type in, let's look at what definitions we have. We don't have any, because we're on DTT. Okay, sorry. So our database has no tables in it right now because we've not run migration. So right now, if I did, /D or DT, nothing comes up. But if I go back to my other terminal, if I run migrate, let's see what actually gets created. If you don't have typos, so manage.py. Okay, notice it creates a whole list of things. So if you look in the list of summary, I see school attendance. That app got ran, but there's also all these admin authorization tables that got created also. This is something, again, baked into Django. they have their own models that they're using too. So now if I go back to my pSQL, go /D, notice that I have a bunch of tables. Most of them I did not create myself or don't really know what they're doing. But if I scroll down, eventually you should see your app and then the model that you created. So in this case, the naming is your app name and the model name. So I have an app called School Attendance and a model of students that I was creating. So Django created a table in my Postgres database called School Attendance _ student. Right? There's some other Django specific tables that get created that Django just needs, but these are the two that you care about. I guess this is the one. I think the sequence table is for auto incrementing your ID, but this is my students table. So if I actually try to look at that, go to /D student, DT. How do I do this? Inspect table.
Hey, Ankur, when you get a second, if you don't mind going back to those beginning steps, the last thing you want to show us, because I didn't catch the command that you did before you moved to this part.
Yep. So if we go back to our main terminal, the two commands we ran, let me clear my screen. First, you need to make your migrations via Python manage.py make migrations. So this actually creates the data that needs to be migrated. Once you've created those migrations, you need to run python.manage with an AA, and then migrate. So migrate will actually run that file, the migrations file. In this case, I have this file. It's going to run that. And that's going to actually update your database. It's going to create a table that represents the model that you created in your Django project.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I didn't see the migrate command before you moved on.
Gotcha. Yeah, sorry, I might have gotten a little quick over that. So after you run migrate, if you look in your SQL database, you should have a bunch of tables created. And then the last thing I want to do was look at that table. So my Postgres. All right, so it seems like I need to do, okay, so sorry, there's no student table, that is my bad. I need to use the actual table name, which is school attendance. So if I do /D, type in the table name, in this case, school attendance, it should give me the fields for that. So let's make that a little larger. All right, so notice that I have a few fields in here. I have a name field that is a varchar. So notice it's a SQL field now. So I have varchar 64. I also have a date field. These are not null because I didn't specify that they could be null. So again, this is your table that I got created. So I didn't write any SQL here. Django took care of that for me. All right. Any questions about up into this step where we created a database, created our models, and then had Django automatically create the table representation for us?
So I don't have any questions at this time, but like if we go on break or later on today, can you hop on a call with me so we can figure out like my Postgres thing?
Absolutely. Yep. We'll definitely make sure someone can help you with that. Any other questions before we take a break?
When I tried make migrations, it failed to find the database because when I changed the database name, I left the DB dot in the string. And so I corrected that and did the make migrations again. And it says no changes detected, which is kind of scary.
Okay, yeah, we could take that offline, but yeah, sometimes you might get that. So what I assume happened is that it created your migrations file, but it had trouble finding your database. So you should be in a good state. So if you look at your migrations file, if you go into your migrations folder and just kind of inspect it, make sure it has like the model that you were trying to create.
Yeah, when you create, when you make migrations, it has nothing to do with your database. It's just making a migration script. When you run migrate, that's when it looks for a database.
Yep. So just, yeah, verify you have a migrations file in your migrations folder, and then you should be good. And then once your database is set up correctly, you want to do Python manage.py migrate, and that's actually going to update your database. So if you get an error there, then we'll need to investigate further. But yeah, you should be fine. So give it a try, and hopefully it works well.
Ready?
Okay. So let's take a break. So I have 11:13 on my end. Let's take a 7-minute break and be back at 11:20, and then we're going to get into continuing on from our school example here. All right, so just to go over what we did before the break. We created models. In this case, this model has a name and email. I went with name and date of birth. Either way, we created a model in our models.py file within our, am I sharing my screen? No, I'm not. Oh, all right. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm always unsure about that. All right. So we created our models in our models.py. In this case, we created a student model. Then we created a migration script. So again, to do that, we do Python manage.py make migrations. Again, the app name is optional. If you want to only make migrations for one particular app, you specify the app name. Otherwise, you just run make migrations without the app name here. It's going to create a migrations file for you. So if you run your make migrations again, you'll have like a 0002 .py, initial.py. Either way, all your migrations, when you run manage.py migrate, it's going to run those migrations and then create the SQL, create and run the SQL for you. So in this case, this model of students will be represented as this table that you create in SQL. So again, Django does that for you, so you do not have to write SQL yourself. All right, so after you make migrations and migrate, your database should be good to go. Let's go back to our code. All right, so I'm not using SQLite, so I'm going to restore what I had before, which is Postgres and my database name in Postgres. All right, so our models right now are set. Let's actually proceed on from there. So we created our models. What we need to do, if I go back to what I had before, basically we've taken care of this portion right here. We create our models and our database is good to go. We need to create some URL routing and also some views. Sorry, our display and our control logic in views.py. All right, so we've checked off this. We checked off this. Let's deal with our URLs because that's a generally easy thing to accomplish. Our views is probably the most complicated part of this equation. All right, so I'm going to go to my Django project and go to my URLs .py. So here, there's some code written for us. I'm going to get rid of this commenting here. But we need to basically tell our project URLs to actually look in our app URLs. So right now, we created this URLs file from earlier. There's nothing in here. But eventually, we're going to add some logic in here. Our project needs to know to look in that URLs file. So currently, this is the only path that it cares about. So now we're going to add a new path in our project.urls file. All right, so I'm going to do path. And here, I want to create a path to my app. So in this case, I'm going to do school attendance. So I'm going to spell that correctly. And then I need to include or use the include command here. So in my imports from Django.urls, you probably have import path already included. I'm including a module called include here. All right, so this comma just means I'm importing a couple of modules from Django.urls. So I'm going to use this module here, include. And then here you want to give your app name. So in this case, my app name is, school attendance in quotes, and then .urls. So what this is going to say is look in this module additionally for finding paths. So in this case, this is one path it's going to search. It's also going to search in my app for my URLs there. Again, you got to type your things correctly. If you don't, you're going to run some issues. Was there a question there, or was that just the typo I had?
Oh, no, I was just pointing out the typo.
Thanks. Yeah, I make many typos. Apologies. Okay, so now that I specified this, again, this is just a list. Notice that this is just a Python list. So I have this comma here, added a new line using this include module. So that include just takes in the name of your URLs module from your app. All right, you guys with me? So now that I've told it to look in this file, I can actually add some paths into my app URLs. I'm just going to copy this so that I can have a starting point, paste everything I had before. I'm going to delete the unnecessary stuff, so I don't need the admin stuff. Don't need to include here. All right, so now we're going to add a path. So basically, paths, if you can kind of view them as URLs that the user is going to go to for your website. So in this case, My base path currently is school attendance. Again, I can name this anything I want. I can name this just like my app. So this does not have to match your app name. This does need to match your Django app name because it's actually looking for this URLs file inside your app folder. As opposed to this, it's just a URL. You could, again, I can name this donuts if I want to name it donuts, and that's not really sensible. So let's just call it school. We don't have to, again, we don't have to match any name with our project or app. That's just a URL that the user is going to navigate to. All right, so in this case, I'm going with school as my base. Again, this is my app name, URLs file. And then in my urls.py inside my app, I need to specify some paths here. So if I want my base path just to be my landing page, I could have nothing included in addition to that. And then I need to specify the controller portion of this. I'm going to call it views.index. And then give it a name. So let's just say name equals home page. I don't know what I want to call it. All right, so I need to import this module. So this views, to be clear, is referring to this views.py file in my app, right? So I need to actually include that here so that it knows about it. So I can do from school attendance.views, or I can do imports views. All right, so this is my app, and then I import the views module, which already should exist. There's nothing in here, but we're gonna reference some function called index. Again, I can name this again whatever I want. I can call it home or home page, whatever I want to name it. In this case, I just go with index. All right, so it's going to look for something called index within my views module. All right, so just to back up to reiterate what's going on here, we're specifying the URL that the user is going to go to, and that URL is going to map to some method within our Django application. All right, so we actually need to tell it, all right, when they go to this path, in this case, this empty quotes is basically being added to where the base path was. So it's going to be school/nothing, and that's going to be our home page. All right, so in my views file, I'm going to go to views.py. I'm actually going to create a method. I'm going to call it index. Again, this is matching the name that I'm using in URLs. So I called it views.index. So that .index is what I'm creating here. So define index. This will take in a request value. And right now I'm just going to write paths. So what this is doing is when the user goes to where my URL is, school/, they're going to be navigated to my index logic here. Right now, my index logic is doing nothing at all. But let's say we actually want to return something to the user. We can do that once we create our templates. So if we go back to our diagram, where we created our URLs, this actually just maps a client request to some logic. That's what urls.py is responsible for. Our models is the actual data that we're going to be managing or interacting with. Our views kind of merges those. So when it gets to request, it's going to call some method. That method may or may not interact with some of your data. Again, it doesn't have to. And then it's going to use that data. It's going to pass that data to your templates, which are just going to be HTML files. And your templates will show something to your end user. Okay, so again, there's a lot of steps here. Again, I have a notebook here. I've taken notes because I do this often. There's so many steps to remember. So I would recommend, maybe taking notes, but again, you don't have to. But a lot of steps to kind of remember here. So we create our URLs file in our app. We added some routing logic in there. And now we're adding some logic in our views.py.
Hey, Ankur, can I just an FYI, you're not expected to be doing any templates, views, or URLs until Thursday. Just want to keep that in mind.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to do this over and over. So we're just kind of giving you introduction of how Django kind of works and looks. But don't worry if you're like, well, I missed like half of this information. We're going to do this repeatedly so that you guys get a lot of practice with it. Okay. All right, so let's actually just get something that the user can see. So our goal here is just to get a full stack web app kind of up and running. So we created our backend. We need to deal with our front end now. So to do that, again, a few steps to keep in mind. In my apps folder, I'm going to create a new folder within that application folder. So in this case, I'm going to call, you have to call it templates, because that's where by default Django is going to look for a templates folder. So this should be a folder, not a file. New folder, call it templates. What happened? All right, I need to delete that ghost file I created. All right, I want to create a folder called templates. It'll let me. All right, so I created a folder called templates within my app. Inside of there, I'm going to create a folder and give it the name of my app. Again, this may seem kind of silly, but it's kind of just the way we organize our files. So templates, and then another folder that matches your app name.
That doesn't match the app name.
Sorry, Sarah, I heard you say something. I didn't quite process it.
That doesn't match the app name.
Yes, because of course I have a typo. Okay, so I have school attendance. Inside of here, I'm going to create an HTML file. So let's create an HTML file and call it index.html for my homepage. Here, I'm just going to use my HTML template that I always use, HTML base. And now I have something I can display. So here I'm going to create a hello world prompt or greeting, hello world. All right, so this is a standard HTML file, nothing special going on right now. I just have a heading called hello world. All right, so that's my index.html. If I go back to my views.py, now I can actually render that template so it actually can use this and display it as a web page. So to do that, I'm going to use this render module that's kind of import that should be imported already in your views. That's coming from Django.shortcuts and then import render. I want to render something to the user. So in this case, I'm going to render that template. So great opportunity to look up documentation. So let's go render Django template. Templates in Django. See what they have for us. Scroll down. All right, so this is a more complicated example where they're actually passing data, but right now I just want to show a web page. So scroll down. All right, that's something we don't want to do right now. Looking for render. Okay, so the example I have here is it's a string. Not what I'm looking for. All right, not what I'm looking for. So let's go with render. All right, render. So we're going to be using this method, and it takes in a few parameters. So the first parameter is request. I need to blow this up a bit. So that request is basically the request object that's passed to our method. So if you remember, our method is going to take in an input of request. You just got to kind of expect that we're not passing it. Django is going to pass us a request. It's going to be like an HTTP request. We're going to return pass that as our one of our parameters. What else we have? We have a template name. And it looks like the rest of the parameters are optional. They're already specified. So context, content type, all those have default values. So we don't need to pass those. We don't want to. The two things we need to pass are the request object and then the template name. So let's see if we could get that up and running. So here, I'm going to do school attendance. No typos, and then my template. So I think that's how I refer to it. So again, that's my folder here and index.html. So this is going to tell it to render this HTML file when index is going to be called. So in this case, I'm going to render that and return it.
Hey, Uncle, I got a question.
Yep.
That's kind of dumb. Whenever you was creating the school attendance folder, it keeps nesting it within the templates. Well, it's not nesting it properly. It's kind of putting it along like side by side versus the folder going inside of it. I was saying, how did you actually create that folder where, because mine's basically, it says templates dash school attendance versus nesting it properly.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a small annoyance of VS Code. Basically, if you only have one folder nested within another folder, it's going to just condense them. So you said you're saying templates / school attendance. That
Correct,
is,
yeah.
yeah, so that is structured correctly. VS Code kind of just combines that. Again, I kind of got annoyed with that. So there's a way to configure it so it actually separates those folders. And if Alex, if you create a second folder, actually break that apart. But you shouldn't have to. So there's a setting in VS Code. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there's a way where you can have that not being combined automatically. But
Okay,
your setup should be correct if you're seeing that.
Okay, yeah, I just thought it was being done, sitting there deleting and recreating. I'm just like, it doesn't look like yours. So
Gotcha.
thank you though.
Yep. All right. So we have our three.
Sorry, Ankur. What did you write in your index.html file? I missed that part real quick.
Yep. No, it's just a standard HTML file. So it's from what we've done in the.
Oh, okay, just an H1 tag. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Again, you put anything for that you want on this page. But in this case, I just have a header that says "Hello World." The rest of this, actually, I don't want this right now because we'll talk about linking that stuff later. But I just have a title and a H1 tag. You could ignore all these extra pieces that I have in my template. All right, anyway, so simple HTML file. All right, so we go back to our diagram. We've done our models and database earlier. We added our URLs, that is our routing. We added logic to our views so that when the user goes to a particular route, it calls a method. That method is gonna render one of our templates. In this case, we only have like a simple index.html file, but it will get more complicated as we go into the week. Again, so views is responsible for passing data to templates, and then templates will be rendered by Django, so the user actually sees a web page. All right, so we're actually checking off all these things. Views, again, is your controller. It's the one managing the data and the requests and the templates for us. And then we should return a web page to the user. So assuming everything's correct, again, there might have been some steps I missed or something I screwed up, but assuming we have everything in place, we should be able to get this up and running. So I'm gonna go back to my terminal and get rid of my PSQL because I don't want it. We already migrated, so we don't need to migrate here. Now we need to actually run a server so that we could run our project here. So to do that, I'm going to type Python manage.py, and there's a run server command. This is how you get your project actually up and running. So if I type run server, assuming everything is correct, my server should get up and running. If there's an error, my terminal is going to serve as like my debugging console. It's going to display the errors that I need to fix. So let's cross our fingers. Maybe I have an error, maybe I don't. So I'm gonna hit enter. All right, so
I've got all the errors.
yeah, we'll definitely make sure you're good to go in the afternoon. If you have no errors, you should see something like this. So it should give you the location of where your server is running. In this case, this is my local host and then port 8000. By default, 8000 is going to be your default port, but you could change that port if you want to. So let's say for a reason I don't want to use 8000. When you call run server, you can specify a port. So let's do 8888. So if I do that, notice that my server is now running at localhost 8888. So if I copy that URL, so let's do a Command C. I'm going to pause here just in case people are trying to get their servers going. All right. So if you have this means everything in your logic is correct up to this point. Your server should be running. I'm going to open a new. I need a Chrome window. Where are you, Chrome? Sorry, my browser's still launching. All right, that took way longer than I thought it would. Okay, so I have my Chrome up here. Let's make that a little bigger. And all right, so now in my Chrome, I'm going to paste that URL where my server is running. So I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to get a window like this. Now, this might seem like a bad thing, but no, this is working correctly. So what's happening here is I went to my server location and it's saying, hey, I don't know what I'm supposed to show here. So this is an error page from Django saying there's no page located at this URL, which is what I would expect. Because if you look at what they list, there's two routes it can go through. It could go to admin / or you go to school /. So if we go back to our URLs file from our project, notice that admin is one path that we specified. That was kind of already there for us. We added a school path. So we want to go to school, and then we go to our app school with nothing else. So this is empty string. So it's just me school / should navigate to views.index. if everything is wired up correctly. All right, so school is our base. I'm going to type school. Notice they tell you which ones exist. I'm going to type school in my address bar. Nope, not like that. I'm going to append school. All right, so when I hit enter, now that I have my base here, notice I get a web page that looks like something I created before. I see hello world, because again, just going through the entire process, the user, which is I guess me, types in a URL of /school. Again, using our base server location. So in this case, localhost port 8888, because that's the one I specified. Again, by default, your port will be 8000. So I went to that location /school. That is saying, hey, look in school attendance.urls for further information. So Django is going to look in my school attendance.urls file, which is over here. So switching to that, it finds a path that has nothing in it. So this is just going to use the base path, which is school. And then it's going to go to views.index to figure out how to actually respond to that request. So the user made a HTTP request of, hey, I want to see what's at localhost port 888/schools. And now we're taking that request here. So this request object contains data about your HTTP request that was received. And in this case, we're using a method called render. This is a Django method that will take in the request, which I don't know what it quite does with it. But the main thing is we're telling it which HTML file to show our user.
So do you have to put school attendance /index HTML since you're in the same file?
Yeah, the reason you put this is because your templates folder should have this structure. You should have templates and then your app name and then your files in there.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Again, it seems a little weird, but Django's just kind of by default, it's kind of picky about that. Again, there are ways to kind of configure that so you don't have to structure it this way, but by default, just kind of go along with this for now. All right, so that with lecture time, obviously it was kind of longer, but without too much effort, we have a full website running here, right? We have a place a user can go to. This can interact with our database. Currently, we're not using our data from our database, but we can. Let's actually go through that example again. We're going to go more repetitions through this throughout the week. So I want to introduce Django to you to see what it can do. We'll get more reps with it. Was there a question there?
Yeah, in the urls.py, the path that I have apparently is not something that keeps it happy.
Sorry, what was the question there?
Okay, is this one? Okay, this is school attendance.
Yeah, so I'm inside my app URLs where I have this stuff. So my project URLs just simply tells it to look inside my app via this include statement. I'm saying include another list of URLs, in this case coming from my app, which is called school attendance. Inside of there.
Wait, go back if you would. I missed that first line the first time around, so I don't have it in.
Yep. So you need to include this module from Django.urls, include the include module, kind of confusing there. And then you need to add a new line that says whatever base you want. So again, you can name this something else if you want. I can call it, code Platoon if I want to. Again, this is just the URL that the user is going to navigate to. So this can be named at your leisure, but your include has to be your app name .urls to map to the URLs file that we created earlier. Inside of here, we're adding a new path, and we're just telling it how to process the request. In this case, views.index is going to process this particular path, but I can add a new path if I want to. Again, as you would expect with a website, you're going to have many locations. So if I want to do like attendance as like another, having typos. If I want attendance to be a location they can navigate to, I can add that here. Let's call this attendance. And the name of the attendance also. All right, so if I created a new route, I need to handle that in my views. So I'm going to go to my views, create a new method called attendance, since that's what I named it. I'm taking a request object. Again, this is something that Django is going to pass automatically. And let's return something else. So in this case, instead of returning my index.html, I'm going to return something else. And this is going to get a little more complicated. So apologies if you guys feel lost, but again, we're going to practice with this over and over. So in this case, I'm going to call a file called attendance.html. I'm going to do something a little different here. So what I want to do is create my HTML file. I don't want this stuff here. All right, now I actually want to use some data from my database. So Django allows us to actually pass values to an HTML file. The way we do this is, let's just have an H1, let's say list of students. And then here, I'm going to have some odd looking syntax. So my syntax, this is for SN students. All right, so the syntax is gonna be a bit odd. Basically here, anything between my curly brace %, this is Python logic. This is not HTML or JavaScript or anything like that. And then you're gonna need to end your for, end for. All right, so in between here, I could write actual Python. That's gonna be a for loop. So in this case, it's gonna iterate over students list and then give me each student, and then I could use that for my HTML rendering. So let's say here I want to create a list item, and let's say a student has a name. So this student object has a name value and a date of birth object or field, if you remember for our models. In this case, I just want to create a list item for each student. So I probably want an unordered list here, and then create a bunch of student names at least. So let me relocate my list items. Any questions about what I'm trying to do here? Again, the syntax might be foreign to you guys, so don't worry too much about the syntax. But again, what I'm trying to do here is just I have an unordered list for every student I might have passed to this HTML file. It's going to iterate over that student's list and then just show the name in a list item.
I take it we don't need to worry about like tabbing for Python with this methodology here.
Yeah, I don't think tabbing matters because we're in an HTML file, but always good to check that. So I always just tab just for readability, but I doubt it's required. Yep.
Is that something you can do because it's in Django, or is this something that you can do with any HTML file?
Good question. So this is Django specific. So you can't automatically use this for any HTML file. This is using something called Jinja, I believe, which is another library that lets you actually use Python within HTML. But yeah, so let's actually give this a try. Again, there's a few steps, foreign syntax, but let's kind of just see how we could actually use some data from our database in an HTML page and deliver it to our end user. So I set up my HTML file. I need to pass something called students here. All right, so let's actually figure out how we can pass that. So in my render method, I should be able to pass some additional data. So in this case, how do I want to do this? Let's see. I think it's data. All right. Where'd my web page go? There it is. All right. So render, we have context. So context is how we actually pass data to our web page. So if we look at context, a dictionary of values, hopefully you guys can read that. It's a dictionary of values add to the template's context. By default, it's empty. So if you don't pass anything, then you're not going to get any values. If a value in dictionary is callable, the view will call it just before rendering a template. All right, you don't need to worry about the second part. The main thing is just pass it a dictionary, and then you'll have access to those values. So in my VS Code, I'm going to pass it a dictionary. So I'm going to call my item data. That's going to be a dictionary. I'm going to give it a student's object or a name here. So I'm going to call it students. And then now I need to actually pass it my students object. So again, we're going to do a little something complex here. Just want to show how it's done before we get familiar with it. So I'm going to do from school attendance, imports, school attendance.models, import students. So what we're actually doing here is we're importing this student model that we created before. All right, so this student model, notice I have some errors here, so I need to clean that up. But I'm importing the student model that we created. in my views. And then from that, I'm going to call student.objects.all. This is essentially a query that's being done. This is saying select star from the students table. So you guys remember your SQL? Basically, effectively what's being done right now is a select star from students, or whatever my table was. I think in Django is school, Django students. All right, so this is effectively what this call is going to be doing. It's going to be fetching all the students that are listed in my students table. All right, so that's going to return something called a query set. If we go back to this diagram, data sets, that's what, so we make a query to our database returns a data set. In Python, or I guess in Django, we have an object called query sets. Effectively, that's basically like a list in Python. It's a little more advanced. There's a few more peculiarities with a query set, but effectively it's a glorified list. So we're getting a list back from our database for whatever query we made. So in this case, we're getting a list of students back in our models. And then from that model, we're accessing the objects. So here, basically my students value should have all the students in my database. Currently, we don't have a student that exists, right? So there's a few ways we go about it. We could write raw SQL and insert a student. We also insert students from the Django side of things. So if we want to do that, all right, we have a few more minutes before lunch. Let's try to get this in. I'm gonna, what do I want to do? Let's create a new bash prompt. All right, so some of this is in our curriculum page, which I haven't referenced much today. I'm going to scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Okay, here we go. So we're going to install another module or another library to use with our Django project. In this case, we're going to do pip install Django extensions. So I'm going to copy that, run that in my terminal. So pip install Django extensions. And then I also want to install IPython. So I'm going to install two libraries at once, give that a run. Maybe not, no comma. All right, so it's going to install Django extensions and something called IPython. IPython lets you actually run your Python scripts inside your terminal. So that's going to run in a few seconds. Once I've had this installed, I actually need to add that to my list of apps. So if I go back to my settings file, remember we updated our apps up here, installed apps. So we added school attendance because that's an app we added. For Django extensions, we need to add that to our list also. So I'm gonna copy that, add that as another app here. The ordering of this doesn't really matter. It's just a list. So it should be fine.
Yeah, so a quick question. Is this mandatory for us to make this stuff run, or is this just extra?
This is extra. Yep. You don't have to always install Django extensions. Usually, again, I don't even use IPython usually, but I just want to go through the motions of actually adding some new libraries. So added this here, but yeah, good question. So this is not every project you're going to create. You don't have to do these additional steps. This is just for something we're trying to do here. So now we install Django extensions. Now we can start our shell. So again, I'm just going off the curriculum page. I'm going to copy this command. So Python manage.py shell plus, and then IPython will be our editor. So if I run that in my terminal, let's get some more space here. All right, so just copy that command from our curriculum page, give that a run. Okay, so now we can actually type some Python logic here, and that should execute. So in this case, we want to create some student objects. So some of the syntax, again, you're going to have to look up. You're going to get practice with this through our challenges from today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. But here, we want to create a new student object. And then this .save is actually going to add that to our database. That's going to be like doing an insert into command. All right, so first we create an object of student, and then we need to push it to our database via save. Okay, so let's actually do that. I'm going to create student equal student, and then name. We can go with Jonas since I talked to Jonas last. And then date of birth. I'm going to guess Jonas's birthday. I don't know how far off I'll be. Let's say it was 10/04, I don't know, 1980. I don't know, 9. I might be way off. Who knows?
Close enough.
Okay, I'll go with close enough. All right, so we're gonna create a new student object, hit enter. Now we need to save that student object in our database. So I'm gonna do student.save. And I got an error. I bet my date's off. So I need to do year, month, date. That is my bad. So let's go with students. Formatting with dates gets tricky. So we go 1989. Month is 10, I think 05 or 04, I don't know. All right, so this is October 10th, 1989. Might be way off, who knows? So we create a student object and we need to save that to our database. So students.save. All right, got no errors, so that's good. So that record should be in our database. If you actually want to quickly verify that, we can totally do that. Go into T-SQL, school, Django was my database name. I'm going to do a select star from school attendant student, semicolon. Notice we got a record in our database. So we didn't write SQL ourselves, but Django handled that for us through what we just did in our shell here, where we created an object and just called save to add it to the database. All right, so we do have one record. Let's add one more student since we're trying to show a list of students. Let's do students. Who did I talk to last? I don't remember. I see Sarah on my screen next, so Sarah will be in my database now. So we'll do student name equals Sarah. And I will guess Sarah's birthday also. I could add a last name, but I won't. So we'll go with 1987, maybe a February birthday.
Actually, my birthday was 2 days ago on the 26th.
Oh, hey, happy birthday. Let's get that.
Belated birthday.
Sorry, we're in June on the 26th. Happy birthday, Sarah, or happy belated birthday.
I was 84.
Okay, that was not too far off. All right. So happy birthday, Sarah. We're going to add you to our database. So create a student object, do students.save to actually add that record to our database table. All right, so we should have two items in our database table. There we go. We got Jonas and Sarah. Let's actually make sure that what we added before actually works now. So going back to my views.py, again, I'm calling student objects.all. That's going to return a query set that represents everything in that student's table. I'm going to pass this data dictionary as my context value. So this is a dictionary I'm passing that's going to have one record in it. Again, I can have multiple values in here. Like, let's say I want to create a new value. Let's say greeting. Hello, Oscars. Okay, you can pass as many values as you want to in your dictionary. Okay, so via this context, I'm passing this data dictionary. That data dictionary is going to be passed to my HTML template. So key thing to remember here, these are template files, not actual HTML files. They will get converted to an HTML file in the end. So in this case, this stuff won't actually be in your rendered template or rendered HTML file to your end user. So you're going to replace this with actual HTML code. So in this case, the student object should be iterable. If not, I might need to add like the all here. Maybe I always get confused. But basically, I want to iterate over my student objects, grab the name, and just show that in the list element.
You also need double brackets around s.name.
Gotcha. Thank you. So yeah, anytime you're using Python code, you need to either surround them in curly brackets percent or double curly brackets to actually access that as a Python object. Versus these are HTML elements, so that's standard formatting in an HTML file. You need to use these curly braces. Thank you, Tom. To actually get the value here, because S is a Python object.
Wait, so do you need both those or just one?
You need, like, we mean this versus this?
Yes.
Yeah, you need this because I'm writing a for loop effectively here. So this is needed as in addition to this. If the question is when do you use percent over double, I should know that, but
We're going to be covering all that on Thursday.
okay. I guess it'll be TBD or to be covered, TBC. The main goal here is iterate over this, display a name. Let's see what errors we may get or may not get.
Hey, Ankur, I have a quick question before
Go
you
for
run. In your views.py for your app, in the last line, is there a reason you're calling index.html and not attendance.html?
There's a reason. It's because I make mistakes often. Thank you. Yep, so we want to render the right template, in this case, attendance .html. Thank you, Sean, for catching that. Okay, let's give this a run. So again, go back through our steps. We're going to expect our user to navigate to school / in this case, and our new view is located at attendance. So it's going to be school / attendance. And that's going to call our attendance method. That method in our views.py is going to render our attendance.html template and use some data that we're passing. In this case, our data, some of our data is coming from our database. So hopefully, if everything is hooked up correctly, I'm going to go to my terminal. Let's trash some of these. All right, let's get a new terminal going. All right, so I need to run my server again because my server got killed there. I'm going to do Python manage.py run server. In this case, I'm going to use my default port, which is 8000. So I'm not going to specify a port myself. Let's give that a run. Let's see if we have any errors. Nope. So no errors in the output is usually a good sign. So in this case, I need to go to this location. Hello world. All right. So I'm going to go back to my base. Notice I got to go back to school. So I go to school. That's going to be my home page, which we were just at. If I go to /attendance, notice I got a list of students. We see Jonas. Let me blow that up a bit. Don't want to print. Pull that up. All right, so we have a list of students, and then we have our 2 students from our database. So again, this is our full stack application. We set up a database, put some data in it. The user was able to go to a location. We were able to grab that data from our database and then push it out and display out to the user. Again, yeah, as Tom said, we're going to be going over this much more in detail. I just wanted to go over the example where we actually create a backend and then deliver the data from the backend to the front end so the user can actually see the data. Any questions about Django, any of the steps that we went through? Again, a lot of steps, so it's going to be definitely intimidating early on. We're like, well, there's like 50 steps I need to go through. How do I remember that all? I recommend, again, taking notes. I have a notebook that has, various steps for various tasks that you might want to do. I always find that helpful, but again, if you don't want to take notes, that's totally fine. Documentation is there to save you online. So you're gonna be reading a lot of documentation for this week and probably going forward too.
I think I know where I went wrong. After we create the virtual environment, was I supposed to do a CD to .env?
You're not supposed to CD into it. You're supposed to source it. So to go over that quickly in case anyone else missed it, let me hop out of my server here. So if you create a virtual environment via python-m VNV, let's say some VNV, you give whatever name you want, whatever name you give there, you need to source it afterwards. So to do that, you type in source, some VNV, bin, and activate. So that's how you actually get into your virtual environment. The first step creates it. Second one actually activates it or gets into that bubble. Right?
I do have that in my notes, so I think I did that. But my school directories are directly under my first Django directory. That's not right, is it?
We could take those offline, but yeah, we'll definitely make sure make sure you're good to go. But yeah, your folders here might be a little different. If you didn't specify the period when you created your project, you might have a nested folder at the top level instead of having your project and app folder at the top level. But yeah, either way, it still should work fine. You just gotta make sure you're at the right level when you call manage.py. That's the most important thing. Okay, what questions do you guys have about Django or anything else? Again, we're gonna get a lot of practice with this, so stay tuned.
Ankur, would you mind in your apps folder showing your urls.py?
Absolutely. So here, we're just taking additional paths. So this is extending basically what our project's URLs is processing. In this case, our base for this is school. So we look at our URLs for our project. School is the name we gave our base, and then we're calling school attendance. Again, we don't have to specify a name here. We could just leave this empty if you want to, and then they would just navigate to our where our server is running. But usually you want to have properly named routes. In this case, I call it school. And then in that I have a blank path, which serves as my home page. And then I have another path that the user can navigate to view another page of my choosing.
I'm having a lot of trouble keeping track of the difference between school proj and school attendance
Yeah.
and the second school attendance.
So the second school attendance, again, it's just the naming convention of creating a templates folder and then putting your templates within another folder that matches the name of your app.
I think it would be a lot easier for me in the future to name my app starting with the word app.
But yeah, that works. I guess, yeah, I could have maybe made my naming a little bit clearer. But yeah, I guess naming can go a long way. So here, yeah, I usually, again, add a proj to my project folder, and anything else I assume is an app in my project or Django project. But yeah, again, you can name your projects and apps the best way you see fit, for sure.
So what is an app anyway?
It's kind of just like a sub project within your entire project. So if you remember from our quick example from Amazon, Amazon might be your project, and then within that you might have various apps, like a billing portion that only has like the billing specific logic. Your Amazon Prime stuff will only be specific to Amazon Prime, obviously. Your music stuff doesn't need to know anything about your billing directly. Like, sure, they might be related as they might use similar data, but they could be totally separate and exist kind of on its own. So again, for our example, we're going to be probably creating one app per project, but the whole idea here is you can create multiple apps for your project if you have those sections that need to make sense to kind of separate out, right? Because it wouldn't make sense for Amazon just to have like all of their apps in one code base that, it's like a giant blob that contains all the logic for all of their functionality. I'm pretty sure that they have it separated out and make more modular, just make it easier to maintain and develop. Okay, so again, the rendering stuff, I know probably lost a lot of you guys. The syntax here, you guys can look it up on the Django website. Again, they probably have better documentation than anything that I've mentioned here. But just understand you can pass data to your HTML files and then use some Python in your HTML templates to kind of render that as you need to. So the key here was in views, we passed it a context value. That context value has to be a dictionary. You can't pass it any data type other than a dictionary. It will look in that dictionary for various items. In this case, I use students. If I want to use greetings also, that's simple enough. I go make that last change. So here, let's just say we have an H2. And here I could do double curly braces and just do greeting. That greeting, again, this is looking in my dictionary and look for a value called greeting as a key. And then it'll take that key and display the value. So in this case, I should see hello Oscars if I did everything correctly. So let me run my server one more time. Python manage.py run server. Doing this thing. All right, I have that page up. If I refresh it, notice I get hello Oscars. So again, you can pass your own data or data from a database, whatever you want to pass to your template, you're able to do so via the render method. So render lets you pass a dictionary with data in it. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording here.